Hello, my name is Olena. I'm a volunteer at Promote Ukraine, and today I would like to welcome Els Ampe, Belgian senator, in our informal studio of Unlock Ukraine. And
thank you.
Happy to see you.
Happy to see you too.
I would ask you a few questions that would be related to your life, your political career, and of course some questions that would be related to Ukraine. Feel free to answer the way you prefer, and we will be glad to have any answers from your side. To start with, I would like to start with something very personal for me. You were one of the first Belgian politicians who openly condemned Russian aggression against Ukraine. I remember one of the first marches that Promote Ukraine has organized. It's been, I guess, March 6th. Was the biggest march that we've ever organized and gathered in Brussels, and you on that day spoke from the scene. What were your feelings that day? What did it mean for you?
Well, actually, I've been following Russian politics for a long time. In the beginning, it was because of literature, because I just love Russian literature. So Alexander Pushkin, Tolstoy, I love the romantic stories. But then I was shocked how the Russian state is doing politics, how they treat people. So it was a very contradictory feeling between my love for Russian literature and my feeling about its horrible politics. And when I read about all the people that they relocated in several times in history, they just say, you are going to live there, you are going to live there, like the Chinese do. And like they did in the Crimea and in Donbass and in a few provinces in Ukraine, I was from the very start convinced that the Russian dictator Putin was the aggressor. But they were very good in spreading propaganda. In Europe, we all received a lot of unsolicited propaganda from Putin and the Russian dictatorship, stating that it was special operation in Ukraine to fight against the Ukrainian Nazis. But it made me think about other things that they did in history, and was like the same pattern again and again and again. And then I looked at what Estonia said about the war and the invasion, what Lithuania was saying, what Poland was saying, and they were very they were all saying the same thing. Russia is aggressing Ukraine, and if we don't stop them now, Europe won't be safe. And I think if you just analyze the situation without being influenced by propaganda or by the love for literature, and then it was clear. Russia invaded Ukraine, and there was no doubt about that.
You touched on a very sensitive topic for, I guess, a lot of Ukrainians, Russian culture. This is something most of Ukrainian activists and Ukrainian officials feel like is abused by Russia as a mean of propaganda as well. Mm-hmm. What most Ukrainians believe is that now is not the right moment to promote Russian culture. On the contrary, a lot of European cultural institutions, including Belgian cultural institutions, think that this is a way to, bring peace closer, make Russia and Ukraine friends again, and we all think that this is not the right moment to, build friendship between Russia and Ukraine before Russian people. They feel the responsibility for all the war crimes, for all the crimes of aggression that were committed in Ukraine. What do you think should be,
well, I think first things first. Now Ukraine and Russia are at war. Russia invaded Ukraine. Putin is the aggressor, so he needs to be kicked out first. And then we can talk about the culture, and we can talk about it all the time, of course, but I think that now it's mostly important that the world, NATO, Europe supports Ukraine to keep Europe also safe from Russian ideas about expanding Russia until reaching the North Sea. A lot of people in Belgium, they didn't believe that. They didn't feel the Russian idea of expanding the territory, because Belgium is a country which is very small. We only have 11 million inhabitants, and people here are very peaceful and never want to expand the country. It's an idea that does not exist in the head of Belgians. They only want to expand their house. That's what they want. Everybody has a brick in their stomach, and they just want to build the house and build it a little bigger for the family. That's all. Never want to expand the country. So that was why it was so different. It was so difficult also to convince Belgians and Europeans that yes, there was an agenda to expand Russia. Yes, they would invade Estonia or Lithuania if they are not stopped at the borders of Ukraine. And that was a very difficult story to tell, because people here, they didn't know enough about Russian culture. So knowing about the culture is really important. But now, okay, first fight the war.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think this is how a lot of historians also comment on the war of Russia against Ukraine, that this is the war that should bring end to the imperialism on European continent.
Yes.
And hopefully the last empire falls.
Yeah, and another thing about imperialism, when I was a child, I always heard that the United States is imperialistic. And I always wonder, why are they saying that? I never heard of the United States taking other states and adding it to the country. So I couldn't understand. But now that we learned that the French diplomacy, the French media had been infiltrated by the Russians for decades, now we understand where this anti-Americanism and the idea of the Americans being imperialistic comes from. It's from the Russians, who are imperialistic themselves and cannot understand that the United States isn't. So that's the reverse of what is happening here in Belgium, and where we as a Belgian have difficulties to understand imperialism, because we don't want to make Belgium bigger or something like that. And now I think it's important that all these infiltrations have been shown to the world, because we don't want dictatorships to tell what to do in Europe.
I think you already answered this question, but still this influence of Russian propaganda that is being coming to Europe through many different sources, through NGOs, through media, through church. What do you think should be the strongest and most effective response of Belgium, EU member states? How can we fight against it?
I think that the best action against propaganda is counter-propaganda. Inform the people. Let them know about the Russian culture. It's because I read a lot of Russian novels that I know about the imperialism. It's a romantic aspect. Of course, I love the literature because of the romances between the people, but there are two aspects in the novels. You have the romance between the people, and then the romantic idea about the country, and the country must be big, and people need to be heroic and things like that. If you know that and you feel it through the culture, then you have a different way of looking at politics too. And I think that we just have to educate the people. Between the two world wars in Belgium, Catholic Church had also a big infiltration of Nazi Germany. And a lot of Catholic priests, they sent, they did propaganda, and they sent young people to the war to fight against Europe and to fight with the Germans, with Nazi Germany. So what have been done, I think that counter-propaganda is the only solution.
And what is your opinion on trying to restrict the activities of those organizations, or maybe even Moscow Patriarchy, that we think is spreading this propaganda and in this way undermining the national security of Belgium, for example? Do you think it's effective?
Well, actually, religion has always been used for the good and the bad. Now, I'm not religious at all, but I think that it doesn't help to force people. I don't think that you can win the heart of the people by forcing them. I think that you can win the heart of the people by the heart. So don't make martyrs out of the patriarchs. Don't do that. I would strongly advise against it and say educate the people, do counter propaganda, show the reality of what Russia and the dictator is doing to the Ukrainians, all the victims that they are creating. I think that the truth is always the best weapon.
You also mentioned this showing what are the crimes that Russia committed. At the same time, we know that humans, our society is at some point normalizing things that couldn't be normalized, and there is this well-spoken, a lot mentioned term such as Ukraine fatigue. How we can still make this relevant for foreigners? How can we make them remember about it and still think that this is not normal, what is happening?
I don't think that Europeans think that it's normal. It's just that because the word is like taking a lot of time and people, their interest is shifting to other things. It's a very human thing, even though this is horrible what is happening to Ukraine, and I think that we should stand with you every day. But everyone needs to be honest, and you know people have a lot of things to worry about, their family, their jobs. So I think to get them involved in the faith of the Ukrainians, you just have to continue what you are doing now, and I admire your courage and your conviction, and what Promote Ukraine is doing is just proceed, continue. This is the way to go, and I think you're doing a great job and just have to continue it, because if you would ask now to Putin to get to the table and to do peace negotiations, at this point he will only take and never give. And we don't want the Crimea to become a dictatorship, I think. We cannot give up one piece of land of Europe to a dictator. I'm sorry, we cannot reward his behavior.
Thank you very much. This is the best way that you could probably believe that we are doing the right thing. Yeah, hearing this from you is very important, and I think very inspiring for all of our volunteers. Speaking about this relevance of Ukraine-related issues, you as a member of Open VLD of the Liberal Political Party here in Belgium, how high would you think Ukraine is on the agenda of party of your politics, but also party of Belgium in general?
Well, before the invasion, it was very low. Except from Guy Verhofstadt, who has always supported Ukraine. In 2014, he was at Maidan. He already said that all this that is happening now would happen. Nobody believed him here in Belgium, unfortunately. And now I think everybody has to admit that he was right. He stood on the right side of history, and since the invasion of Russia, it took a few months to get Ukraine high on the agenda, but I think it's still high on the agenda, yeah. And if you continue the job that you are doing, it will stay high on the agenda.
I also remember that back in June, I believe, you were one of those who launched the resolution that was condemning the war crimes of Russia, and also offering the support to International Criminal Court in the prosecution and the investigation of those war crimes. What was the progress since then? Were already some partnership established, some work done in this direction?
Well, I think a lot of work have been done, even with the Wagner group in the beginning. I also stated that it needs to be condemned as a terroristic organization for their crimes. And in the beginning, you felt like a reluctance among other parties, and now more and more people are convinced that this needs to be done. So you have a good evolution in things, and in the support for Ukraine. And now, what was very difficult in Belgium is because we are peaceful people, and the only solution now is a military action. It's very difficult to convince people about that, and I got like a lot of criticism in the beginning because I said, look, I think the best solution is to support Ukraine military actions, because Putin doesn't care about the economic situation of his people. He doesn't care if the Russians are starving, because he says, you starve for the Russian dream, the Russian idea. It's like this big romantic thing that is very harmful to the Russian people, and we can do as many economic banishes that we want, but winning the war is the most important thing. That will keep Europe safe more than anything else. So and you know, women in the war have also big. I always had this feeling that people were looking at me, oh, you're interested in all these like not girlish things like cars and drones and dead rights and military and things like that. And I had to fight against the prejudice of women or girls being interested by these things. But you know, a woman who is fit is still 10 times as fit as a fat man, and technology does the rest. So whoever you are or whatever you do, women and men are as crucial in the military as they both are as crucial in the military, I think.
Yeah, I think this is also brings us to the question of the role of women in war.
Yeah.
And well, I know that you are a fighter for female rights and female emancipation, and yeah, you strive for the equality, solidarity, freedom of individuals, and this is what Ukrainians believe, that this is what we are fighting for. And currently in Ukraine, there are around 60,000 female soldiers. Around 8 of them are on the zero line of the front line, and this is usually not hard for Ukrainian women to get into army, because while trying to join the military service, they are facing this systemic discrimination, this kind of attitude that, well, maybe you should better not go, or maybe if you do go, you choose the safest profession in the military that you could. But still, there are people who, well, women who want to actually fight, to be snipers, and so on. And Ukraine believes that we are also, striving for this great change in the army, and we can be an example of how women can be treated in the military service for other EU and NATO countries. But what do you think is the most crucial in this fight for women emancipation?
I think it's up to each person to decide upon his own or her own faith, and it's not up to others to decide what is safe for you. And that's it's about liberty, about freedom, about choosing for yourself, whether it be about the military, about your body, about your choices in life, your job, what you stand for, your convictions. And I think that Ukraine can breathe some fresh democratic and liberty air into Europe, because we see that a lot of European countries suffer from non-democratic movements or policies. So maybe Ukraine can like revive democracy in Europe, and yes, the military. Why can't women be active in the military? It shouldn't be a question.
What you said is also exactly what we tend to believe. And from what I found out about the novel that you wrote, that also speaks a lot about this, opposition of a democratic and authoritarian regime and democracy as something to be fought for. What can be these lessons that other older democracies can learn from the case of Ukraine?
Yeah, we can learn about the importance of democracy, the importance of freedom, the importance of having a country that is not led by a dictator, the importance of parliament. Because the first thing that a dictator does is getting rid of parliament, or just making sure that they have to shut up and just do as the dictator says. And that's something that many people forget in Europe, because we had peace since the Second World War, and then people like doze in and forget about how hard we had been treated by a dictatorship. The Nazi Germany, the National Socialists, they were horrible here. And many, like my grandparents, they didn't talk about it. A lot of people didn't talk about it because they were still horrified. And I think that people need to talk about that, even though it will be very hard also for all the victims in Ukraine. But the best way to prevent it from happening again is telling your children and grandchildren about it, and also telling how to resist. That's why in Belgium I would like to support the idea of a resistance museum, where we display all the resistance in Europe and outside Europe, like the resistance of Ukraine, the resistance of the Iranian women in Iran right now, the resistance of the Belgians and the French during the Second World War. There are so many resistance stories in so many countries, and we have to show it. How can people be like seduced to ally with the dictator? We have to know about this process. We cannot just say they're bad people. It doesn't work like that. There aren't any good and bad people. They're just good and bad decisions. And so it's very important to know why a person took a certain decision and how we can decide or how we can change their minds and their hearts to take the good decision.
Now that you mentioned the fight of Iranian women, and I remember meeting you at one of the Iranian protests, and I know this is also a very important topic for you. What do you think Ukraine can bring in this issue? Because it is a difficult topic for Ukraine. Iran as a state is supplying the aggressor, Russia, with the weaponry. At the same time, all deep in our heart, we understand the struggle of Iranian opposition and Iranian activists. In a way, we're the country that needs help itself, but what can we do so that we can ensure that Iran can win this battle for democracy?
Yeah, but the fact that you asked this question shows how beautiful the heart is of the Ukrainian people. You are fighting a war yourself and you're worrying about the Iranian women. That's so beautiful. It's something to learn from. And I saw a lot of people from Ukraine at the rallies supporting the Iranian women, and I can only admire it. Just like continue to show this to the world.
Sort of populistic voices, they were claiming that by supporting too much Ukraine, we forget about people who struggle in other countries, and these people feel abandoned. On the contrary, whenever I personally met people from conflict areas, from countries where war takes place, they were always in deep solidarity.
Yeah.
And this was...
just like throwing seeds of doubt, just throw them away. That's all. It's propaganda against Ukraine, I think.
Also, I wanted to come back to the topic of Wagner and the consequences that could follow after the acknowledgement of Wagner as a terrorist organization. Since long ago, Ukraine is fighting for the opportunity to condemn Russia as a state that finances terrorism. Although this is not easy, and there is not really legislation, neither on national level nor on the EU level, to bring it not just as a political statement, but also as something that could cause the legal consequences. Do you still think this is the path that we should follow, even though how hard it is, or maybe we should just focus on sectoral sanctions, military support, and that would be enough?
I think right now we have to focus on the military support, because this war has to end. At a certain point, we have to get Ukraine to win the war, and send as many tools as needed, so we end this war and peace can be installed without giving up territory or people. So I think this must be the main focus right now. And of course we also have to condemn the Wagner group for its crimes. But at a certain point I would like focus all this energy on winning the war.
Now that Ukraine is preparing for the counteroffensive, a lot of rumors were already about it. There were scandals regarding the leakage of the documents from US intelligence. Still, this is something that a lot of Ukrainians, and not only Ukrainians, are waiting for. But Ukrainian officials are warning that it might be not the decisive battle. It might be not the case that we win the war just after this counteroffensive. But the hopes that the officials of the countries who are our allies seems to be quite high. This makes Ukrainians a little bit alert on whether there could be voices that would bring up the topic of the peace negotiations in case this counteroffensive does not meet the expectations of the Western
But
parties.
these voices are whispering ever since Russia invaded Ukraine, and they are whispering, yeah, we need peace negotiations. But if somebody enters your house with a gun and puts that gun here, then what will you say? Let's have negotiations. It's a quite difficult situation, I think. And this is the situation in Ukraine, so somebody needs to help to get that person out of your house first. But the debate will continue. These whispers will never go away or die, and maybe they will be higher and lower. We just have to make sure that it's very clear what the stakes are, and the stakes are giving up people who live in democracy and handing them over to a dictator in Russia, or keeping them safe with us in Europe. These are the stakes. And as long as politicians and people see that this is the goal, then I think that the whispers will only stay whispers and will never be loud voices.
And just to end our talk on a positive note and on the future that we really hope would come soon. When you were a member of Brussels Parliament, you were in charge of the matters related to urban planning, environment, urban design, and when we think of Ukraine's reconstruction, I'm a student of urban studies myself, we really hope that Ukrainian reconstruction could bring us closer to sustainable development goals and sustainable transition that all world, and especially European continent, should move forward on. What are the ways that Ukraine can secure that our reconstruction goes in line with those sustainable development goals? And how do you see the role of European member states and especially Belgium in this process?
It's a very, very good question, because of the war, people will look differently at collective things like electricity and telecom, because it's very vulnerable. And metro is also collective, and a train too, but you need to meet the sustainable goals. So I think that we can learn a lot from the Australian movement of the off-grid tiny houses that are like solar powered, completely self-sustainable, and we can learn a lot from that. Ukraine is also a big country. People don't always live in the city, but also in the rural areas. And if you want to make sure that you have the energy, the telecom, all the needs that you need in an environment without weighing too much on the environment, then these off-grid solar-powered tiny houses can be a good solution in urban planning.
Yeah, this is right. I remember the head of the Association of Energy Efficient Cities in Ukraine said that now Ukrainians really know the value of electricity.
Exactly. It's in this situation where things get scarce that you value it more, and that you also get creative. And you know, the same goes for the African continent, for instance, where there are always a lot of political wars going on above the head of the people. But at a certain point they get creative and they create their own system. And then we need to share innovations and share technology and share knowledge. That's the most important thing.
Well, hopefully Ukraine will soon become this boot camp for innovation and for all the most sustainable solution, and bring us to better Europe in the end.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you very much to our listeners, and please subscribe, like and share it with your friends if you liked the video.